Seb, thank you so much. That was really good. I enjoyed that a lot myself. Good to see you again. Got lots of questions on Slido. So if you've got questions for Seb, please post them on Slido. It's sli.do, and you'll need to enter a code, which is like a hashtag. It's like VCD for Virtual Community Days, uppercase, I think it has to be. Lots of questions already though, so get ready.
Okay.
So the first one, okay, I'm going to throw it at you anyway, see what you think. What's the difference between BDD and specification by example? I know you said they were the same thing. Do you literally mean they're the same thing?
I literally mean they're the same thing. Okay,
so we should kind of drop the like, is acceptance test-driven development as well a synonym?
I treat it as a synonym. I've seen websites online where people try and add nuances to it. To be honest, the nuances are so nuanced that nobody bears it in mind. Essentially, they're all the same thing.
Okay, yeah, let's move on. Next one was an early question. What features will we see introduced as BDD tools mature? Maybe what would you like to see, or do you have knowledge of this, or you might not be able to share that, but what would you like to see the tools do?
Yeah, so I would like to see the tools take a requirement all the way from discovery through to maintenance. So, I mean, there's no secrets. We're working on an example mapping, a distributed example mapping tool, and my hope is that at some point in the near future, those example maps will generate stubs for scenarios that we will then be able to collaboratively flesh out and review, and that will then generate feature files that we can then write automation code for. And now my hope is to see traceability from the beginning of the requirements refinement all the way through to delivery, because I think that will address a number of challenges that we have at the moment about trying to find the right tooling, but also will add benefits that we don't currently enjoy, which is actual traceability. So anyone who's tried to do traceability using just Jira will know that there are challenges. If you try to do it with Excel, you know there are massive challenges. If your company's bought into things like Wars or Rec Pro, you'll know that they have challenges of their own because they're sort of discrete, large, heavyweight software that sits off to the side. So I see examples, rules and examples, and the flow through down to automated acceptance tests to be a really excellent way of almost getting traceability for free.
Okay. Next one from Monica Martinez. The other two questions were anonymous, I should say. How can you get developers and automation testers to collaborate to get better automated tests and efficient? Question mark, to avoid the burn toast, question mark.
Yeah, so I mean, basically the answer there is early collaboration, and that's what the 3Amigo meeting was designed to do when it was first talked about, and that's what we encapsulate in our discovery workshops as well. So you would have people who have the responsibility for doing basically 3Amigos requires you to have a customer representative, someone representing development skills, someone representing test skills. One of the things that's different, or maybe slightly different, about the way teams that adopt behavior-driven development work is that actually it's typically the developers who are responsible for the test automation there, because the automation of the scenarios, of the given when then scenarios, is the point at which you start designing the API of your underlying solution. And therefore, it's not something you can farm off to a third-party team that has no skin in the development game. It's a development activity. So essentially, we're bringing test automation into the team from a BDD perspective, anyway.
Okay, next one's a bit of a challenge, anonymous again. Okay, so what evidence is there that BDD delivers value? I guess I wouldn't ask that question. I'd say, well, how do you sell it to managers, if you like, if you're looking to get into this?
Right. So first off, evidence is a hard thing to come by in software process world. So you can ask about the evidence for Agile. There's been research that's tried to demonstrate the value of test-driven development with limited with limited persuasiveness, maybe. So there's no hard, solid evidence because it's really hard to run controlled experiments in this space. What I can say is that organizations that adopt behavior-driven development typically start, like in so many ways, with an experiment. So you read about it and you think, you know, this might work. So let's try it in a small way with one team or one new part of the product and see how it goes. And then you introspect or retrospect on that process and see whether it has worked for you. Now, I have worked with teams and organizations where this has rolled out widely across the organization, and they have given us testimonials saying how great it's been. But again, it's difficult to distill that down into actual solid numbers, partly because most companies don't want to share those internal details, but also partly because it's very hard to baseline, because the costs of specifying, developing, delivering, and maintaining a product spread out over many months, if not years. And so capturing that data and comparing and contrasting it with something similar done in a different way is nigh on impossible. So actually no proof. Empirically, I have seen it work. I have also seen it fail, but my experience is that it's failed for localized internal reasons about which come back down to the challenges that I described on one of those slides, which showed the changing working practices. You know, some organizations find it very difficult, very hard to change.
I mean, my suggestion would be perhaps to just suck it and see. I think, as you said, just run a little experiment and maybe get your team in a room and say, right, this afternoon we're going to try and formulate some stories and some examples that help us understand what we're dealing with. And then at the end of the day at 5 p.m. say, well, was this a waste of time or did we get value out of it? And just start there. And my experience is that people will feel much better about their time being used well.
When we start small, I typically start with example mapping. If there's one practice that I have never run with a team and seen it not deliver value, too many double negatives. It's always delivered value. Example mapping, after 30 minutes of example mapping, it's amazing what a team that's already jaded and think they know everything have learned about this story that they weren't even going to bother talking about. So example mapping is where I would start. And again, I would direct you to Introducing Example Mapping by Matt Wynn.
Okay, let's move on. This question from Preeti. Your viewpoint, please. What % of organizations practice BDD versus TDD approach? I think that's a different question than the diagram you were laying out. I mean, I guess, is it an alternative, BDD versus TDD? I mean, that's what you're trying to avoid, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, so absolutely not. If you recall the 8-step diagram that I showed, that shows test-driven development as a sub-loop within the BDD flow of work. So you do your discovery, formulation, automation, and once you've got a failing scenario, then you drop down into the TDD loop where you actually write low-level programmer tests that drive out individual lines of code or classes or methods or whatever. Okay. So they work together.
Yeah, and I don't think percentages help. I mean, what would you do with those numbers anyway? I mean, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so the truth is the behavior-driven development, whether you call it behavior-driven development spec by example or ATDD, is not hugely, it doesn't have huge penetration in the market. Test-driven development is talked about a lot, but most of the surveys that you see show that actually most developers practice it occasionally or never. There's very few people that are actual test-driven development practitioners. It's still not clear to me why that is. There's an interesting discussion to be had there, but this is probably not the right place for that.
Yeah, my guess would be that to create automation for low-level components, there's too much, I mean, from the perspective of the developers, there's too much hassle involved in building mocks and stubs and, you know, temporary code, which they know they're going to throw away. But then again, you're not going to throw away. It's permanent, isn't it? Once you've got automation in place, you keep it. So I don't know. I think people get afraid of that too much. They over-egg that kind of problem. But anyway, moving on. Another anonymous one. How can we manage the duplication of tests when teams follow BDD and the organization also has a centralized test automation team? Now, I think you've kind of answered this, but I don't know if you want to sort of, sum it up.
Yeah. So I mean, the first thing I would say is that duplication is usually not, it's not worth worrying about. So I was about to say it's insignificant. It may not be insignificant, but the automated tests have very different purposes. So the way a scenario or a given when then scenario is structured is to illustrate a business rule. So it's there to explain something to someone who can't read the code. Whereas a central test automation team is normally charged for getting percentage coverage or some level of confidence that the software has no defects in it, and frequently looks at how different parts of the software interact with each other. So if you're going to test a large software system, then every time you run a test, you're going to find yourself running through a number of parts of that software that have been already been tested. So there's always duplication when you're testing a whole system. Whereas with behavior-driven development, the scenarios we'll talk about will focus in a very what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, they will focus in on small parts of the behavior, or trying to illustrate a single behavior, a single rule, and therefore they may test just a class, they may test just a service. They will very rarely go in through the user interface and test all the way through to the database, or at least they won't need to. And in fact, we would recommend that you would start off by trying to just focus on the area of the code that implements that behavior. So long way of saying the overlap is something that people often worry about, but is very rarely a significant problem because the approaches are achieving different ends and have different goals.
Okay, next one from Mike. Bit of a challenging one, this, I think. BDD is an enhancement to functional automated testing. Do you see a similar change for performance testing? Do you buy that?
I wouldn't say, yeah, so I wouldn't describe behavior-driven development as an enhancement to functional automated testing. Behavior-driven development is a collaborative way of enhancing an agile approach by learning early, doing deliberate discovery, by involving the business, capturing what you learn using business terminology, and then automating it. It just so happens that all of that learning, or the predominant amount of that collaboration, the learning, the discussion that you have, is around the functional behavior parts of the system. And so the automation that you get out the back end of this BDD approach will be functional tests, but it's not an enhancement to functional testing. The goal is to reach a shared understanding, to capture it in business terminology, and improve the early aspects of the development and specification process.
Yeah, I don't think we'd agree with the first premise, would we? I think that's quite right. Liz Keough says hello. She's just waving at you.
Hi, Liz. I should point out here before we move on that the three practices, although the names that I've used aren't the ones that Liz prefers, I definitely stole the idea of these three, or borrowed the idea of these three practices from an article that Liz wrote a number of years ago. And yeah, I feel embarrassed that she's listening, and I haven't got the link on the slide deck. I will do something about that.
Okay. Jonathan says, love Seb's talk. Daniel says, kudos for the Kelly's Hero reference. And I'm going to have to close it there anyway, because it's just about getting to 2:15. So Seb, thanks ever so much for that. I'll pass on the questions that have come up on Slido, and I don't know what you want to do with them, but at least you'll have the questions. So once again, thanks ever so much, and good to see you again. Take care.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Are you on the panel a bit later, by the way? I should ask that.
Yes, I am.
All right. See you later. Take care.
Bye. Bye-bye.